my boots on and lace them up. A hard work. Got another day to work. A hard work.
So I'd like to give you, I assume, has anybody here been to a cranberry bog? Oh, great. Okay, excellent. Has anybody seen cranberries being harvested? Okay. Excellent. Okay, that's good. What's really unique about our facility and people that come to work at the station is just about none of us had any experience with cranberries when we came there. I mean, they're just such a weirdo crop. I mean, who gets to work on cranberries and then get a job in it? So it's great that there's been some exposure in your group. That's excellent. So cranberries are one of the three Native American fruit, blueberries and Concord grapes being the other two, that are grown in North America. It has a fairly moderate range to it. Is the red button the laser?
I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, so pretty much concentrated up in the Canadian Maritimes, a little bit of the upper Great Lakes region, and then mostly in the New England and Mid-Atlantic area. You can actually find cranberries if you go down into Virginia and the Carolinas, but you have to go up into the higher elevations in order to be able to find these fruit. For them to be able to complete their life cycle, they have to go through what we call a chilling requirement. And so if they're down at sea level in Virginia and South Carolina, they're just not going to experience those kinds of temperatures, and they'll eventually die out. But you can actually find them growing natively up in those regions. Some of the other growing areas as well would be in Quebec and also the British Columbia area, as well as the Pacific Northwest are the main regions where you'll find cranberries being grown. This gives you a view of what cranberry bogs look like. And as I was chatting with a few folks during the break, you can see this is what our bogs look like in Massachusetts. And they follow the contours of the kettle ponds or the kettle bogs that were formed when the glaciers receded. And that's why they're such funny shapes. Okay, and this is compared to, something that you might see in Wisconsin, where they have built their bogs from old onion and potato fields, and they've made them, 60 feet by, or 120 feet wide by 200 feet long, and they're very rectangular and precise. So this is a very unique character of our Massachusetts bogs, and it does present us with some production issues because it's hard to drive farm equipment around curves and weird sort of shapes. The other feature that I'd like you to really notice here, and this is also because of how these were formed, is that cranberry bogs are always associated with these bodies of water. So when the glaciers receded, chunks of ice were of different sizes. The really big chunks became ponds. The smaller chunks eventually have evolved into what we are now using as cranberry bogs. And they're also very popular recreational areas. There's lots of wildlife. People love to come and use the water resources, walk around the bogs. So they're very much part of the landscape of Massachusetts. A little bit about cranberries. They're in the same family as rhododendrons and azaleas, those acid-loving plants that are called the Ericaceae. They are a perennial plant. Once they go in the ground, it's not uncommon for cranberry vines to be productive for 20, 30, even more years than that. In fact, when we finally just renovated State Bog in 2007, our vines were over 100 years old. So, they do start to lose some productivity, but they will just keep going and going. They are very adapted to this area. They love the sandy soil. They love the low pH. If it's 3.5 to 4.5, they're very happy. Just like blueberries would tend to like those acid soils. So I say here at the end, they can be in production up to 100 years, but right now one of our main focuses is that we're really trying to get growers to get into more of a production practice of, say, renovating every 20 to 25 years. So being more like how apple growers would kind of, work within their orchards. And so this allows them to, make sure that their vines are always producing at the maximum productivity. Just to give you a picture of what cranberries look like. Oh, that's okay, no problem. I forgot it's on television. So here's where we start with the plants. So they're very low growing. A lot of people drive through southeastern Massachusetts and don't even realize that they're driving past a cranberry bog. They're in those depressions in the landscape, and the plants are only about this big. They're almost more like turf, or growing grass. We're very much down on our hands and knees when we're working on cranberry plants. They have fairly shallow root systems, and they have runners, kind of like strawberries do, and then they produce these uprights that bear the fruit. So here's an upright here. Here's just a start of a flower bud. Here's a nice bee's view of, a very copious bounty of flowers on a cranberry bog. And then to see an upright actually with 3 fruit on it is pretty unusual. We're usually pretty happy if we can get 1 to 2 fruit on an upright. But some of the new varieties that are coming down the pike can actually support 3 or 4 fruit. And that gives you an excellent yield at the end of the day. Just thinking a little bit about how the U.S. production and where Massachusetts fits in, surprisingly, might surprise you, but Wisconsin is actually the biggest producer of cranberries in the United States. They usually produce about 53 to 58% of the crop, depending on the year. We're usually around 28 to 32, and then New Jersey, Oregon, and Washington pick up the balance. There's a little bit in Rhode Island. I think there's about 70 acres grown in Rhode Island, a couple hundred acres in Maine, a little bit in Michigan. But that's pretty much how the breakdown goes. And then also Quebec has, I think, about 3,000 or 4,000 acres now that are in production. And they actually have quite a lot of organic cranberry growing up in Quebec because they don't have as much pest pressure as we do, which we'll talk a little bit more about. So how do we compare as far as a crop? So these are some very general numbers. Don't hold me to these exact acreage, but just to let you know, there's major crops, which would be like corn, soybean, sorghum, wheat. Those are all your major agronomic crops. And then you would have like some minor crops, which you would think of maybe, maybe even rice or potatoes or strawberries, getting to some of the specialty fruit. I kind of consider cranberries to even be a micro crop because across the United States, we have about 40,000 acres of cranberries. Okay, so just to kind of put that in perspective, corn's around 84 million acres, sorghum at 5 million acres, even grapes at 1 million acres, and we would be 0.04 million acres. Okay, just to give you some perspective, because this is part of our challenge in trying to grow cranberries, is that we're so small. It's hard to get, the government to pay attention to us, chemical companies to pay attention to us, breeders, any of those sort of things that you need to have in order to produce a successful crop. Like most of the farm machinery that we have on bogs, the growers make themselves. Or they'll take like a hay rake that they use from, another farm, and they'll retrofit it to do some sort of function on the cranberry bog because nobody makes machineries for cranberry farmers because we're just so small. It's not really a good market for it. This is kind of busy, but just to give you an idea of the life cycle of cranberries, it takes about 16 months to go from the bud, which is initiated usually in August, to go from a bud, so there's 2 things going on. You have this new growth that's being set in August at the same time that you have this year's fruit on there. Okay, but here's this bud. It goes through a development. Now the other part of the plant is still producing fruit in the harvest. It goes through the rest period. Remember I talked about that chilling requirement? That's during the winter time. It needs that to reset its clock. A lot of different fruit trees like peaches, those need what they call vernalization. And so that's why they need that cold temperature in order to, so now they know, now that I've gone through a cold time, when it gets warm again, I know I can grow. So that's kind of the biological signal. So they go through that, and then through April and May, that new growth starts developing. This is when a lot of our pests get excited, because all that nice, tender growth is out there, and they go, yeah, there's lots of good food out there. And then here's some of the new flower buds, and then the flowers drop out, and then we end up having fruit. So it is, being a perennial plant, long life cycle, and this presents challenges to us as well when we do research. If something happens in June and we make a mistake or we get funky weather or something happens to the experiment that we do, we have to wait a whole another year to be able to repeat our experiments. So it's very different from, doing work in a chemistry lab or microbio where you could just, streak some more plates and get your experiment run in another week or two. We work on a very, very different time clock. Sometimes it can take us 5 years to be able to get up in a grower meeting and be able to say, yeah, this is a good thing to do. So there's definitely a very different time scale that we have to work on in order to get answers to our growers. One of the big things, where's my water? No. Is that cranberries water is incredibly important to the production of cranberries. I remember when I first started working in cranberries back in 1990, I was amazed at how growers move water around. They've got pumps on the bog. It's a system of drainage ditches that are around the farms, and they're always moving water on and off in order to do different types of practices. And probably what you're most familiar with is the harvest. And so people always think that cranberries are grown in water, but that's not true. If you were to go out there now, it's very dry. And in fact, cranberry really don't like to have their feet wet when they're trying to go through their production cycle. But we do use water for harvest. We do use water for during the winter time to protect the plants against drying out. And it also allows us to do different cultural practices. Like right here, this is sand being applied to the ice. When the ice melts, kind of filters through the vine canopy and helps invigorate the cranberries. We do use flooding also for pest management. And we also use it for irrigation just to keep the plants going when Mother Nature doesn't provide us with enough water. So we do use a lot of water, but a lot of it is non-consumptive. The growers go through a lot of effort to have tailwater recovery systems so that they can recirculate and reuse their water. So with those ponds that I showed you in some of those initial sites, either growers will have to either pump their water on, they can use it, and then they can allow gravity to bring it back to the pond, or it goes vice versa. It depends on whether the bog's lower than the pond. But, even though water gets utilized a lot, not a lot of it is consumptive use. So here's a picture of a bog in the wintertime. As I mentioned, we do flood it. So that's to prevent it when we have those cold winds, the soil gets frozen, plants can dry out. So this protects them from drying out. And it also provides a really nice place for the neighborhood kids to come and play ice hockey. And it's great, too, because that's a very shallow flood. It's only 12 inches or something, so it does freeze pretty quickly. And so it is kind of a nice environment. And so this is during the season. This is what it looks like. I mean, it's these very low-growing, trailing vines, very dry. And that's really how you want it. And I'll show you some pictures when we talk about diseases. If it's too wet, it actually ends up increasing your chances of having phytophthora root rot and fruit rot disease. And here are the flowers. A little bit of lore, of course. So the cranberry came from when the Native Americans first saw this, they thought it looked like the head of a crane, so they called it craneberry initially, and then it got shortened to cranberry. And then, of course, this is the very picturesque harvest at the end of the year. So, usually this is probably a little bit early because the trees haven't started to change color yet, but it's this incredible crimson that gets, when the berries get knocked off the vine, they float in the water, and it's beautiful blue, and it's really, really quite a sight to behold. The other way that we do pick cranberries in Massachusetts, there's two different ways. What I just showed you before is wet harvesting. This is dry harvesting. So it's almost like a little rototiller type thing where it has a rotating head on the front with tines that actually comb through the vines. And then if you remember that picture that I showed you with the upright, the fruit are held onto the stem by a very narrow stem. So they're easily knocked off. The berries are mostly air, so that's why they'll float. But this particular machine will rake through the vines, lift it up, to the back, and then it collects it into, a little carrier here. Then they get dumped in the bigger bins, and then eventually those bins will get picked up by a helicopter, and they put it onto the back of a semi, and then it goes off to the processing plant or the receiving plant. For us in Massachusetts, since we have so much fruit rot pressure, anything that ends up being fresh market fruit that you like buy at Thanksgiving that you want to make your cranberry sauce out of has to be picked this way. Okay, because once it's picked in the water, for us, the chances of it rotting are very much increased. And also all the fruit that gets picked in water goes into cranberry sauce or some other types of products. So after they get dry harvested, people will stand by sorting machines. I don't know if you've ever seen any of those old-timey pictures of, there's usually ladies doing it all. And they do. And as the berries go through, they sit there and they just hand pick out all the rotten berries on these little conveyor belts. And so we have one of these Hayden separators at the cranberry station. And when we harvest our fresh cranberries, which you guys might end up getting, I know we bring quite a few up to campus, we actually go through and we hand sort them all to get out the rotten fruit. So this kind of gives you a little diagram of how it goes from the field to the table. So basically, and this is another way that cranberries are kind of unique from other types of fruit like strawberry or apples or grapes that can be sold directly to the consumer. Just about everything that's produced in the cranberry industry goes into process, so it never really hits the farm stand. So, like I said, wet harvest process, that's 95% of our industry. And then what growers have to do is that they have to sell their fruit to somebody. So they sell it to a handler, which probably most of you are familiar with Ocean Spray. That's a big handler for cranberries. There's also Deca's Cranberry, there's Cott, there's maybe one or two others. Okay, so growers have to sign a contract to be able to sell their fruit to whatever their handler might be, and they'll sign a 3 or 5 year contract. So then that way the handler knows they're going to get fruit, and then the grower knows that they have a place to sell it. So what ends up happening is that they sell it to the handler, and then it's immediately frozen and stored. And they have these huge depositories down in like the New Bedford area where they ship all of the frozen fruit, okay, until they're ready to make it into cranberry sauce or dried sweets or juice or cereals. And then all these products are then packed and sold to us, the consumers. Then the other 5% are dry harvested. They still have to go to a handler, and then those are bagged and sold to us, usually around Thanksgiving time. So that's pretty much the track of how the fruit gets from the field to the market. So now let's start thinking about some of the challenges that we have trying to grow cranberries in Massachusetts. Cranberries are the #1 fruit that we produce in the state, but we do have the challenges in the fact that we grow them in southeastern Massachusetts. It's a very desirable place to live. And we have a lot of neighbors that are building homes right next to a cranberry bog. Okay, so this didn't used to be the way that it was, and so this impacts, the way that farmers are trying to run their business. This also leads to competition for water resources, and we have a lot of significant pest pressures. Being that cranberries are native to Massachusetts, they've evolved with insects and fungi that like to eat cranberries. I mean, that's just kind of the way that the world works. That's why in other areas where cranberries have been introduced, such as Wisconsin, Quebec, they don't have as many pest pressures as we do, because it just hasn't, that relationship hasn't been around quite as long. So this gives you an idea of where the bogs are in Massachusetts. They're primarily in, let's see, so we'll make this is Carver and Wareham, Plymouth and Rochester are where the majority of cranberries are grown in the state. They will come as far west as Norton. I think there might even be some on the other side of 495, and then a few on the Cape as well. It used to be about 30% of the industry was on the Cape. And then in 1959 or so, there was the cranberry scare, and so a lot of bogs went out of production during that year. And so now I think about 10% of the industry is on the Cape. So, and we farm about 14,000 acres of cranberries. So you can see that's very, very small. So again, here this gives you, you've seen some of these photos before, but the important thing and why cranberries are so important to Massachusetts is they really preserve a lot of the character. We figure that for every acre of production area that there is, growers have about 4 to 5 acres of uplands that are associated with the cranberry farm that's not developed. Okay, that just serves as habitat, as water recharge areas. And so we actually preserved over 60,000 acres of open space for the area. So you get into this a little bit of a conflict that the cranberry farms are what gives the character of the region. That makes it desirable for people to come and live in that area. But then when people come and live in that area, they end up competing for different resources with the farms. Some of our other challenges include unstable prices of cranberries. It's very easy for us to get into a glut, and prices will crash. Growers work on a very slim margin of profitability, so also our farmers tend to be very small farmers. So they don't have the ability to be able to spread their production costs over, many, many acres. I think the most recent statistic is about 2/3 of our growers farm 20 acres or less. So that's very small. We figure you probably have to have about 50 to 70 acres nowadays to make cranberry farming your main occupation. So most of our growers do other things. They're teachers, they're truck drivers, they're insurance agents, they're assessors, whatever, and they do farming on the side. So that's also a challenge for us because here they have like split interests, and so they're trying to do farming when they can't always make it to educational meetings, and so that also makes it hard. Some of our research needs are heavily focused on pest management, the environment, and also just growing the cranberries, which would be the horticultural aspects of it. So part of what we do at the Cranberry Station is that we really try to advocate and find ways for farmers to be able to be successful, to be profitable in a heavily suburbanized setting. This gives you an idea of some of the volatility of cranberry prices over the years. So starting in 1960, around $10, $12 a barrel. That's how we talk about cranberries, because they go back to these old-timey barrels and how they used to sell them. This would be 100 pounds is equal to 1 barrel. But here you can see up to about the late 1990s, growers were getting $70 to a barrel. Man, that was great. I mean, the joke was that, farmers be coming around in their jeans and their Mercedes, just about, because it probably cost about $25 to produce a barrel of cranberries. So they were doing great. And then it plummeted to about $16. So for the first few years of this century, we at the Cranberry Station were trying to figure out how to help our growers lose less money. We weren't even thinking about how can you make money. We were just trying to say, are there production practices that you can do so you won't lose so much? And so now, in the past few years, they've rebounded, somewhere back up to $40 to $50 a barrel. And that's respectable, that a grower could make a reasonable living if the price stays there. But that price varies by handler. Not all handlers will guarantee that price. So that can also really come to depend on, where you've made your contracts, and because one of the handlers this year is probably going to pay $16 or $18 a barrel, and the other handler is going to pay about $40, so that's a really big difference. This is just an example that water is so central to what we do in cranberries, that we have these best management practices that we put out for our growers, or BMPs, that 9 out of the 25 deal with some aspect of water. From either, flood management, irrigation, erosion control, just, trying to get growers to be thinking about when they construct their farms, how they can do tailwater recovery and any kind of water conservation efforts. And then, of course, here's another picture of how close neighbors can be to an active cranberry farm. And, pesticides are certainly a big concern for neighbors that live next to farms. I probably get at least a call a month from somebody thinking about buying a house near a cranberry farm, want to know about it, or they already live there. But also the bigger concern that people have is the noise, because there's pumps that run on the farms. There's pumps that run those irrigation systems. And we also have to frost protect during the spring and the fall. And guess when that frost protection tends to happen? At 2 o'clock in the morning. Because that's when your temperatures are the lowest. Is usually between midnight and 6 o'clock in the morning. So that tends to be a lot of the complaints that people, or the concerns that people have, is it's the noise, it's the pesticide, and also sometimes just the traffic of trucks, going in and out, creating lots of dirt and those kinds of things. But, you know, when we've had issues, usually if, you know, as part of the university, we can go into a neighborhood meeting and talk to people about what usual practices are for cranberry growers. People usually feel a lot more comfortable about what's going on. So who provides support to growers? Well, we provide technical support as part of the Land Grant University. There's also the Cranberry Marketing Committee, which is the CMC. There's a Growers Association, the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers Association. They provide a lot of political support. They go up to Beacon Hill a lot. They keep tabs on what kind of legislation's coming down that might affect farmers. And the Cranberry Institute is also another entity that's a national group that works down in Washington and kind of covers interests for the cranberry industry as a whole, whereas the Cape Cod Cranberry Growers is our state grower industry group. Wisconsin has a similar one. New Jersey has a similar one. And then there's also health and research and promotion that goes on, and that's heavily supported by the Cranberry Institute. So even though we're a small industry, we got a lot of little groups around that are trying to support the growers in different ways. So as I talked about, you know, we're kind of a micro crop. We're a very small industry. I worked in the citrus industry for about 8 years before I came up to work in cranberries. And at that research facility, we probably had 90 PhDs, and, you know, there were probably 250 people that worked there. It was huge. And I could never remember really a grower coming into our lab to talk to us. But our facility here and our industry is really relatively small, and it's very intimate. So it's common. Growers are always coming into the cranberry station, bringing their little baby jars with their insects that they've caught. I'm always getting bouquets of weeds. The growers don't know what they are. But it really sets up a very nice dynamic that, you know, we know the growers. We've been on their farms. You know, we know some of their problems, and they feel comfortable talking to us about what some of their issues are. So that's a really nice thing. And our growers are very inventive. I mean, we get a lot of our research ideas from talking with them, because they'll say, hey, this weird thing happened, and I wonder if we could duplicate it, because I noticed that cranberry fruitworm was lower on this bog after this happened, even though it might have been an accident. And then we can develop a research proposal out of that and then test it scientifically. So that exchange is really great. And we have all those industry groups that are really engaged to try to fill in the gaps. Even the Growers Association, they have their own research committee that we work with, and they talk to us, and we try to figure out what the research priorities would be so that we make sure that we fill the needs that the growers have. But what are some of the downsides of being small? Well, just like it's a good thing that we all know each other, it's kind of a bad thing that we all know each other, because you know it's a small group, and we have a very limited pool of personnel. I mean, again, if you work in apples or grapes, there are a lot of scientists across the country that are working on these projects. For cranberries, we have a meeting every other year of scientists and extension workers. And when I started, we had about 90 people that came to those meetings. Now we're probably down to about 50 or 55. And that's for all of North America to cover everything. You know, entomology, plant pathology, weed science, engineering, breeding, you know, all the different disciplines that would go into producing a crop. So that's one of the real downsides of being small. It's really hard for us to get a critical mass together. It's hard for us to go for big grants because we're so small. It's hard to get chemical companies to pay attention to us. 9 times out of 10, if we want to get a pesticide registered for cranberries, like for herbicides, I go and look and say, hey, what are they using on corn, or what are they using on rice that maybe we could use? So we spend a couple years doing crop safety experiments and efficacy experiments, and then we go to, you know, the chemical company and we say, hey, we've got 3 years worth of data. Would you consider putting cranberries on the label? And they go, well, that's going to cost us money. And I don't know how much money we're going to make, you know, if you're only going to apply it to 10,000 acres. And if we do get them to work with us, then they have to have residue tests. And so some of the work that we also do is that we work with IR4, which is a federally supported group that helps specialty crops. Like, you know, I mean, we're in the same boat as endive and cashews and radishes and, you know, all those lovely things that we like to eat. Those are really, really small specialty fruit. So this group called IR4 helps us to get those pesticide, to get the residue data that can then go back to the EPA and go to the chemical companies so we can get some of those chemical tools to help us produce some of these crops. So the other thing that's also a downside of being small is that a lot of people don't know a lot about cranberries. So we're always educating, you know, neighbors, real estate agents, politicians, about how we do what we do and why it's important for Massachusetts.
And librarians.
And librarians. So that's kind of like the big overview of, you know, where the industry is. But now let's come down to what UMass does. And so here we are at the Cranberry Station. And we are located down here. We're about 5 miles west of the Bourne Bridge on 495. And we're 130 miles from campus, which again, it's a good thing and it's a bad thing. You know, we don't get caught up in a lot of the politics that happen, but, you know, we're also far away from our mothership. And so, you know, when we need, you know, physical plant support or we need OIT support, you know, we have to rely on ourselves quite a lot, though that relationship is greatly improving. So it takes us, you know, about 2 hours and 15 minutes to go from point A to point B. So, you know, we come up to campus sometimes for an hour meeting, you know, it takes a day. Pretty much takes your day to do those kinds of things. So it is challenging logistically. How do we fit into the college? So, you know, Dean Goodwin was here earlier to welcome us, Dean of the College of Natural Sciences, and they kind of think of the college as being in two parts. So you have the departments and schools, which then leads down to the Stockbridge School of Agriculture, which Dan talked about, which kind of houses our academic activities. Okay, and then the other part of the college would be these centers and institutes, of which the Center for Agriculture is one. I mean, it's a virtual center, and that's what oversees our research and our extension activities. So we still wear all those three hats. We have our academic pursuits. We'd love to have our graduate students, but we also do our extension and our research activities. So again, this is kind of how this flows, is that we have Steve Goodwin, then we have Steve Herbert, who's the associate dean. So there's all these other associate deans for student services and research. So Steve Herbert's our associate dean. He's also the director for the Center for Agriculture. And that houses virtually these 4 different groups. That's where UMass Extension is. That's where the Mass Agriculture Experiment Stations are, the Water Research and Research Group, and then we're part of the Extension Farm. So we're part with Hadley Farm, with the Turf Farm, and those groups, Cold Spring Orchard. So that's kind of how the flow chart works with how we fit into the university. So here's the station. Here we are down here. This is our lab building. We have an administrative building. We have a shop. We've got a greenhouse. We have about a 1/4 acre of blueberries over here. And so here we are. We're a very typical kettle hole formation that we have our bog here and our nice water resource right here and all the nice surrounding uplands that are right around us. But we are next to the highway. So that's our facility. We also lease about 7 acres up in the Miles Standish Forest in the Plymouth area, and that was renovated. This must have been the year that it was renovated. And also it gives you a great idea, you know, irregularly shaped bog next to water, surrounded by lots of natural habitat. And our mission is to maintain and enhance the economic viability of the Massachusetts cranberry industry, mainly by, you know, finding out new ways that they can produce their crop in the most environmentally friendly way that they can, to be good stewards of the land. A lot of growers have their houses right next to their farms. They don't want to be polluting the space that they live in, the place where they're raising their kids. So there's a real motivation there to try to be as efficacious with, you know, the chemical compounds that are used on the farm and trying to produce, you know, a good crop. So the other part is, we're there to help the growers, but we're also there to serve the public welfare of the area as well. And so how do we do this? We have about 21 full-time people. We have extension professors in plant pathology, entomology, horticulture. I do weed science and IPM. We have plant nutrition. Water is so important that we had been rallying really hard to get a hydrologist on staff. And so finally, last year, maybe 2 years ago, through the federal government, through the Agricultural Research Service, which Dan, I think, had touched briefly on, we got a federal scientist who's working in hydrology, so we're really excited about that. So we have one extension educator who's working in floriculture. We have technicians that support us, and I've kind of broken this down into, full-time and part-time. So we have 6 full-time technicians, 3 part-time. We have support staff. We have a bookkeeper, a clerk. We have a farm manager, and 2 people that work on the bog. So that's a pretty reasonably sized field station. Some field stations can be 3 people, 6 people. So we have a pretty good contingent of folks doing work on cranberries. What are some of our challenges being so far from the main campus? Is that we have very limited peer exchanges. You really learn a lot as a scientist just by meeting people in the hallway and talking about, gee, what was that? Wasn't that a cool seminar I just went to? And I heard a great idea, and maybe we could, write a grant for that. We're all thinking about cranberries. We don't really get to talk to apple or blueberry or strawberry or any other kind of commodity groups. We're all, very limited in that kind of exchange. So that makes it harder for us to find collaborators. If we want to try to work with somebody up on campus, a lot of times, it's just logistically difficult, to get people to come down and see what cranberries look like, to see what some of the problems are. As I mentioned before, we're all our own computer jockeys for the most part, because we can't get somebody to come down from campus to see if we've plugged something in wrong or, what's going on. So, and that takes some time. Our bookkeeper works with firewall issues all the time, trying to get in some of the software packages that the university runs. Just trying to get our payroll done, trying to get a purchase order done. So we have some real, boots on the ground logistical issues that we have to deal with. And then for our graduate students, we love to have graduate students. That's the way that we get a lot of really good research done. But they have some logistics because they have to try to find a place up here to live for 9 months and then try to find a place to live down where they're doing the research for 3 months. And then they're trying to find a place to live in a heavily touristy area during the heavy tourist months, where places go for $1,000 for a week. And this is a graduate student, trying to find some place to live. So, we've had students live in tents on the property. So it's really a big issue. So what ends up happening is a lot of our graduate students actually come from the area, where they can live with their family during those summer months and then try to find some place, up on campus where they can take their classes. So, and then, one of my graduate students, she does live in the Cape area and ended up commuting for her classes. So then, they really lose out on a lot of the college experience by not being on campus as much. So there's definitely some challenges that way. So then thinking about some of the research programs that we do. So we'll have our research. That's kind of like a little bit of our academic. So we have our research and our extension programs. So how do we do our research? Well, we get ideas. As I've explained to you, that's not a problem. We have got growers coming in all the time, noticing things about their bog. We always have more ideas than we have time and people to do it. And then we get people to do it. We got to get money, and then we get more money, and then that's what we're doing. That's what a lot of us spend our time doing, is writing grants so we can, get people on board to try to answer those questions. So where does that money come from? So basically we have 2 different sources that we get our monies from. We have our federal and our state sources, and Dan covered some of these. So we have some hatch funds, which support us, the IR4 group, which helps us with our residue trials. We've been very successful with getting regional IPM grants through the EPA. The Northeast There's actually a Northeast IPM Center that supports a lot of the work that, Dan and our colleagues do. We have the USDA, the SCRI, that's a specialty crop research initiative. That was a program that was in place to specifically help us little guys. Northeast SARE, that's Sustainable Ag and Research and Education. They've been big supporters of the northeastern farms. They're very interested in boots on the ground ideas of what's going to help growers be more profitable and be more productive, be good stewards. They're really into that and very supportive of both students and research grants as well as educational workshops. And then also the NEFA, which Dan mentioned, they have their Extension IPM program, and we've been pretty successful in getting funding through that. Through the state, the Department of Environmental Protection has supported a lot of the water resource research that's gone on, and that's also been supported with the 604B program. MDAR, which is the Department of Agricultural Resources, they support like some of the BMP development, so they would pay like publication costs. And then our grower and industry groups, the Triple CGA, which is our grower group, they'll actually have a pot of, say, $30,000 that they make competitive, that they'll distribute it to our groups to try to work on different research priorities. So we have a lot of different resources that we can try to tap into, but this is constant. You're on the grant treadmill trying to keep things going. Campus is great. They help us. They pay our utility bills. They do provide us with physical plant support. We have about 18 acres of cranberry bog. Everything that we produce, we're an Ocean Spray grower. We sell to Ocean Spray. All those monies go back into supporting at least 1 or 1.5 positions at the station and then some other activities. So we directly, feed that money back into the work that we do. Chemical companies will come in, give us very small grants, $3,000, $5,000, but all this adds up to help us, bring in those summer folks. We get a lot of in-kind support from our growers. We have one grower group that will just come in, they bring a whole crew, they bring all the picking machines, and they harvest our state bog for us, no charge. We have a whole nother grower group that comes and does the same thing for us at Rocky Pond. And so that could end up costing us thousands of dollars. So this is very generous, and I think it just really speaks to the kind of relationship that we have with our grower industry, that they'd be willing to come and do this kind of stuff for us. And believe it or not, people actually will just send us checks and to support our research, which is very sweet. So again, you're probably familiar with some of this processing, but an agency will put out an RFP or a request for proposals, and we will respond to that. We'll write the grants. We'll find collaborators. Sometimes we have to go to our other colleagues in New Jersey or our colleagues in Wisconsin, because that's the only place that we can really find people that kind of are interested in the same things that we are. We end up doing a lot of our own submissions through GAMS. I know a lot of the faculty up on campus will actually have other resources that they can, kind of give that person the ability and just tell them, go ahead and put that through GAMS. So that since we're remote, we end up doing a lot of that ourselves. GAMS is the software through OGCA that allows you to generate your internal processing form that allows you to go through the granting process, because then OGCA will then formally submit the grant to the granting agency on your behalf.
OGCA is
Office of Grants and Contracts Administration, right. So, which is on campus. So I apologize for all the acronym soup. And then if we're successful, then we'll advertise we'll advertise for positions to come and have people work on the specific grant. Like we just got one through SARE to look at some water issues. We're able to bring in a graduate student plus hire another partial technician. And then sometimes these funds are just used to keep, existing people going. And then we do need to publish. The university expects us to publish in scientific journals as well as put out extension materials, and then we have our meetings and we get all the practical information out to the growers. So here's some of our graduate students that we've had over the years. They do all the horrible tasks that none of us want to do, but they really help move the science forward, and they're great to have. We've really done very well. We have a lot of summer helpers that come through to do different tasks. Doing spraying, harvesting cranberries, looking through cranberry fruitworm hibernacula, all sorts of stuff. We even sometimes get high school students that come to us and want a science project. I get a ninth grader calling me saying, "Oh, I want to do something on cranberries." And so we've actually, one girl that I started with in 10th grade, she ended up going to state regionals for a science fair, did very well. She came and worked with us for her 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. She actually published a scientific paper and ended up going and getting like 2 master's degrees. She was just excellent. But, a lot of times we'll have, high school students that will come and work with us for a summer, come and learn about cranberries just to do a small project. So, we kind of interact on all the different levels, and it's really great. And then we also have a lot of fun, that we make sure that they develop some important work skills, to make sure they go out in the workforce. So some of the pest management. Pest management is a big part of what we do. I mean, the main scientists that we have there is a plant pathologist, an entomologist, and a weed scientist. So that's a lot of what we think about. Ann Averill and Marty Sylvia are entomologists. They think a lot about why insects do the things that they do. They do a lot of work on trying to bring reduced risk insecticides into the cranberry industry. It was very common when I just started, 20 years ago, we used a lot of broad spectrum organophosphate insecticides. And when you went out on a bog after one of those were sprayed, there was nothing out there. I mean, these were very toxic compounds. We don't use those anymore. And this is based on a lot of the research that's come out of this entomology lab. Now we have reduced risk compounds. So they're, pollinator safe. They target a very specific part of the insect's life cycle, say a molting behavior, something like that, or it's a stomach poison, so it's very particular to what the insect does. And it's also a lot of less worker exposure or applicator exposure as well. They do cultural management techniques such as flooding or sanding. A lot of those different cultural techniques have pest management benefits. And Ann Averill was just successful in getting an SCRI grant, which was that Specialty Crop Research Initiative, looking at pollinator habitat. It was about just over a $3 million grant that she was able to get, looking at trying to get growers to plant diversified habitat to support native pollinators and to try to understand a little bit more about the colony collapse disorder. So here's, some of the work that's come out that, there's a lot of different types of native pollinators that are out on cranberry bogs. Some of them are very colorful, very pretty. Here's Tanya, she actually worked for about 3 or 4 years at the cranberry station. And she's carrying her quadrant out on the dry cranberry bog during the field season to go count bees. And so these are some of the activities that we do for our research to ultimately help our growers. So, and then here's another experiment where they would have bees in a hive, so they would know where their home is. They would take them a certain distance away, either to like an urban type environment or a forested type environment, and then track. They would actually mark the bees so they would know which ones they were. They'd put like a little iridescent marker on them. And then they would track whether the bees would be able to find their home again. And so this was very important for understanding colony collapse disorder because some of that was related to the fact that they believed some of the pesticides were interfering with the homing instinct for the bees. So this was some of the work that goes on. Cranberry fruitworm is a direct pest of cranberries. This is a little guy in here. He ends up pooping inside the berry. It makes it very disgusting. But it's a really big issue. When a lorry or a big semi pulls up to a receiving plant, they actually will take a sample, and if they find 1 or 2 infested berries, you could have your whole load rejected. So it's a very serious pest for us, very low tolerance. And so what growers have to do is that they have to look inside this is the calyx end, or the opposite of the stem end. They have to look for these little eggs. And you have to do it under a microscope. And so we spent a lot of time doing grower education to teach them how to find these viable eggs. because once you find the viable egg, it'll hatch, and then it's very well adapted to cranberries. So basically, the calyx end is this bottom end. It will hatch, and it takes it about a day. It'll crawl up to the top. It actually orients its body with the stem, and it drills a little hole into the berry. It goes inside, and then it makes a little silk door and covers up the hole. So the only time that it's susceptible to any kind of control is from when it hatches and it crawls up to the top of the berry and goes inside, and that's it. Once it makes that silken door, it's all protected. Okay, and then what it does, it's even trickier, is that it'll have a couple berries that touch each other, and it won't go outside. It'll just travel inside and go from one berry to the other, so you can't even get it then. So it's a really big problem. It's co-evolved with cranberries, so it's very, very good at what it does. Anne spends a lot of time looking at cranberry fruitworm berries. And one way that we can try to manage it is that we actually go out and we calculate percent out of bloom, because its behavior is so well timed with what the cranberry plant is doing. We can actually base our management on what the crop phenology is, or what the crop stage of growth is. So we actually have people go out and calculate percent bloom or out of bloom or whatever we need to do in order to time the management. So here they are setting light traps, just trying to understand the biology of the plant. I mean, what I just told you in 5 minutes probably took Anne 18 years to figure out. You know, it's really, it took a lot of observation and a lot of field work to understand what that insect was doing. So here's also another tricky thing about what the cranberry fruitworm does. It forms these little sand-coated things that we call hibernacula, and that's how it survives the winter. So after it's been happy and eaten all the berries, and it finally, rots the berry out and it drops to the ground, it'll actually encase itself in these little sand granules with, some little glue that it makes, and it makes itself a nice little cocoon. And that's how it survives the whole winter on the floor. So it can survive water and ice and snow and the whole thing. And then in the spring, the little larvae pops out, says, "Oh, it's time to finish my life cycle," and then becomes an adult, and then lays eggs in the newly developing fruit, and we start all over again. So very, very well adapted. So here's a poor summer student who's going through thousands of hibernacula, to try to test different things. So this is kind of some of the things that we're working against are very, very well evolved pests. We do some spraying. Here's Anne very happy out on her spray rig. Here's Marty not so happy in her Tyvek suit. She actually has to be out there spraying. Another thing that we do is that we use sweep nets to go and count insects. So we'll just use these cloth muslin type nets, go through and do so many sweeps, count how many insects we have. And Dan was talking about, looking for that threshold. Is the action that you're going to do to control the pest going to be worth the money that you're going to spend compared to the amount of damage that the pest is going to do? And when we go out and sweep and count bugs, that's when we can find out how many are out there, so we don't have to spray all the time. If the threshold is 5 for bug A and we only find 3, we don't spray. Okay, it used to be cranberry growers would say, okay, it's June 1st, I'm going to go spray. Now everybody goes out and they look to see what they have. And so that's a big part of what IPM has done for cranberries. We also are sometimes very blessed. We'll have visiting scientists that will come and do some research on our bogs. Here was Paul, he was the grub man. And so he was always peeling back the vines looking for grubs. Plant pathology, some of the diseases. Frank Caruso is our plant pathologist. He thinks a lot about fruit rot, a lot about Phytophthora. And he also develops a forecasting method so that we can try to predict whether it's going to be a good keeping quality year for cranberries or not. And that's all based on rainfall and sunshine and what the temperatures have been, and Frank does a lot of that work. So here we are out on his technicians are out there on a grower's bog. We set out little plots. We use these little pin flags. So that's how we know where our little treated areas are. And this guy here is timing, and that person is spraying, because they know, in order to get out a certain amount of product, you have to go for so many seconds. And they're screening different fungicides for fruit rot protection. And then after, part of it is actually looking through microscopes, trying to identify what fungi are out there. So here's Jane looking at some plates. And then, these are examples of some of the different fungi that will come out of the berries. Another disease that we have is called fairy ring disease. I don't know if you can kind of see it. It's a little circular pattern here. And it usually happens that the middle part dies out first. It kind of ends up having this ever-expanding ring, and then the weeds come into the center part and start taking that over. So that's another, not as common, but Frank has spent some time trying to work with trying to manage fairy ring. Phytophthora, that's a really big problem for us. So that's when water is a really bad situation for us during the growing season. This is a low spot and just a place where Phytophthora would just love to come in. So the first thing that we have to do here is a cultural practice. You have to have the drainage improved. Doesn't matter, you could throw lots of fungicide at that, and if you don't improve your drainage, you're never going to control the disease. So the very first thing that we do is non-chemical, improve the drainage, and see if that, helps the situation. Here's just another example of a disease that we see called red shoot. Fairly rare, but they do come up every now and then. And another thing that Frank does is that he'll look at different varieties and evaluate them for rot resistance. There is a breeding program down at Rutgers. We don't do any breeding here. Again, a very long-term project, but there's finally some new varieties that have been coming out since about 2007. And it's based on a lot of the work that the pathologists have done over the years, looking for those traits and doing but traditional breeding to try to develop new cranberry varieties. And we actually, when we renovated State Bog, we made a replicated section where we have 8 different varieties replicated 4 times so that we can do nice replicated studies on there that, we can hopefully publish. As far as for some of the work that I do, work with Dodder a lot. Dodder is a parasitic plant that is a huge issue for us, and I'll show you some pictures. And so I think about a lot of different aspects of weed ecology and why weeds are so good at what they're doing and how can we figure out how to interrupt that. So Dodder looks like, if you saw it out in the field, looks like you took spaghetti and just threw it out on the bog. That's what it looks like. But it's an obligate parasite, and what it does is that it wraps itself around the stem and actually penetrates into the stem with very specialized structures and goes into the parts of the plant that transmit the water and the food, and so it'll directly take the nutrients and the water from the host, but it's an excellent parasite in that it doesn't kill its host. Okay, it just weakens it enough that it can't produce fruit, but the main part of the plant still keeps going. And this can be devastating for growers. As you can see, here's an actual field. So there's not a lot of fruit being produced on that bog. And there's virtually, the grower tries to go through and rake it. They'll actually try to physically remove it. If you throw it on the ditch and don't take it away, it'll actually start regrowing. So it's a very fascinating organism. It's so good at what it does. Its seeds persist for more than 30 years. So it's a very, very much a challenge on trying to, manage this weed. Just to give you an idea of how small these things are, these are the seed capsules, and then within each of the seed capsules, there's maybe about 3 seeds, and you can see how tiny they are. So it'd be really hard to try to screen them or do any kind of physical removal of them. So a lot of our efforts are trying to look at when the seedlings emerge. They do seem to have a host preference. We try to remove some of their preferred hosts. That seems to help. And we also can do flooding. If once they've emerged, they're very susceptible to flooding. So that's another way we can use water. So we have a few different tactics that we can use to try to manage Dodder, but none of them are really good. They're all just kind of keeping it at a slow, low burn. And it will actually attach itself to cranberry fruit, which is just totally weird. And I had a graduate student who was doing some flood work, trying to define what the parameters would be, how long the floods need to be, at what sort of temperatures.
Are those pansies?
Yep, and we were using pansies as our host. Right. Very good, yep. We were doing another ecological study. We were trying to determine the host preference of Dodder. So we had different quadrats that were out there. And we actually went through and, looked at who was growing in which plot and how much Dodder was on them and how many seeds were produced and those kinds of things. And then we had, some other experiments that we were looking at nitrogen rate and planting density and weed management option. And so we're just there. I'm just trying to keep the vines under control a little bit. And there I am on a happy day out spraying my weeds. And then sometimes we're working, what's really interesting too has been a change in the chemical industry is that we used to apply things at like pounds and gallons per acre. Now we're applying things at 3 ounces to an acre or a half an ounce to an acre. So sometimes for us to test these things, we're already working in a very small plot. So sometimes we have to use these very small spritzers that you get from CVS, and to be able to spray our plots because you're trying to put out such small amounts of material can make it really challenging. But we have fun. One of my graduate students has been working with flame cultivation as a non-chemical technique. The growers love this. You just fire this thing up. It's like, they just love it. But you don't ignite your bog, okay? You just wave the thermal weeder over the plants, and it's enough to heat the tissues such that they burst. And you come back about an hour after you've treated it, and the plant's already wilting. So, we're looking at this to be a nice fit for some patchy weeds for organic farmers. They could use it. In fact, we've been lending out our thermal weeders on a pretty regular basis for our growers to try them, before they go out and buy them. So that's been an exciting area of.
Is that for Dodder?
We use it for Dodder's very sensitive too, but we're using it for a lot of our perennial weeds like rushes. She's tried it against dewberries, which are like a strawberry. It's not very effective against grasses, because grasses, when you burn them down, it's just like mowing them. And so they actually recover pretty well.
Can you roast marshmallows on it?
I bet you'd need a really long stick. Some of the physiology research that goes on, we have someone working on whole plant, as well as our hydrologist who's working on whole bog stuff. So Peter Jaranyama is our whole plant physiologist. He's thinking a lot about, photosynthesis and carbohydrates and how do we irrigate the best way that we can and how can we do frost management with minimizing the copious amounts of water that can go out. Because how growers traditionally frost protect is that they'll watch the thermometers. When it gets down to the critical point, they turn on their irrigation system, and then they'll run it for 8 hours. That's a lot of water going out. So what we're working on, or what Peter's working on, is doing intermittent sprinkling so that they'll turn it on for 5 minutes, and then they'll wait till the temperature drops back down, and then they turn it on for 5 minutes. And then they'll wait for the temperature to drop back down. Saves a lot of water. Several growers have tried it, and they've been very happy with the results. But again, it's trying to change the mindset of something that's been ingrained as a practice that growers feel very comfortable with to something that they might not feel as comfortable with. Because if you miss a frost night or you sustain damage on a frost night, you could lose your crop. So it's it's something that makes them very, very nervous. Peter has the really fancy lab with all the bells and whistles and the HPLC, and the rest of us are just got our buckets and our shovels and stuff.
Yeah, but you don't have to recalibrate buckets.
That's right. So here's Peter's group. They're out, looking at, wading out in the bog, working with the equipment, catching the geese that are out on the bog. Frost management, this is some of the automated frost management equipment that he's been working with. And he's actually been trying to work, this is our farm manager, Jim, here's Peter, and he's using solar panels to run his automated systems and his little weather system here. Casey Kennedy is our ARS scientist who's just started, so he's thinking big picture. How does water move, like on the watershed kind of idea, down to the farm, down to the plot. So he's looking at how nitrogen moves, how do pesticides move, how can we adjust our management practices to try to minimize these things moving off target. So he gets to play with a lot of fun stuff too. Here he is putting in a flume. They got some Curlex here. Here's his technicians. They get to wear waders and climb into, water pits, install their water flow meters. Here they are trying to stabilize it. So here's a flume. This is a flume for a cranberry bog. And then these are the planks that you would take in and out. These are movable. There's like a little slat here, and so you can put in more boards or take out boards depending on what water level you want to keep your pond at or your bog at, or how much rain is coming through. So this is a fairly large one. Usually most of them have maybe 4 planks. This one's probably going to have about 9. And here she is downloading some of her data. It's like a pretty nice thing to do on a nice summer day. Some of the horticultural research done by Carolyn. She also works a lot with Casey doing water quality. She thinks a lot about cultural techniques such as sanding and pruning, and doing a lot of our nutritional studies. So here's a pruner that a grower built himself. So it's got the knives that are on a rotating head up in the front, and then he made this little hydraulic rake in the back that kind of pulls all the vines together, so he has less to pick up at the end. So it's kind of a nifty little tool. And then we've actually done some experiments where we go and pick up those clippings and then we weigh them, and in order to, we're testing different treatments. So that was part of, this is Brett, he did his master's on looking at different levels of pruning and sanding and the impact on cranberry yield. She also does some work doing well points sampling. So here's this well point. It's a cylindrical tube that goes down, finds where the groundwater is, and then they kind of use this little suction device to bring the water back up, and then they can test it for whatever they're looking for, nutrients or pesticides. Now we get to do our 7th inning stretch. Woo! Okay, so y'all got a little bag of treaties. Hopefully everybody got one. So we're almost done. So I just brought you some different kinds of sweet and dried cranberries. So just to save you from making faux pas, craisins are actually the trademark name for the Ocean Spray products. If you buy something else other than Ocean Spray, they're called dried sweetened cranberries. Just like you have Kleenex and facial tissues. So I've brought you some dried sweetened cranberries. They're all different, so you should try them in order because they kind of go from less sweet to more sweet, okay? So give them a little taste, see what you think. So I think all of these are actually available in the store now. So one has just less sugar. One has less sugar but with a sugar substitute. And then I've got 2 other varieties of full sugars and then another special flavor. You can see what you think. We did this at one of our cranberry meetings, and it was really amazing just to see the difference. Some of them were much more, had like more oils to them. They had different textures to them, and not that any are better or worse. It's just all different tastes. Whether you like chocolate or vanilla. But this way, it kind of gives you an idea of all the different kinds that are out there. What's that? Dan was wondering how they dry them. They actually, when we had our last meeting in Wisconsin, they took us through the plant, and what they do, they'll actually cut them in half. They actually take all the natural coloring out first and then re-inject them with natural color. So, because when cranberries come out of the field, they're very variable, and that wouldn't be acceptable as a consumer product. So they kind of bring them all down to 0 and then re-inject them with the natural fruit juices. And then they just dry them in big, dehydrators, types of machines. They're a little close to the chest about how they do everything because it's very proprietary. But that's basically how they do them. Okay, has everybody gotten to try them?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Okay, guys, what's 5?
like that?
I'm hearing grape over here.
Okay. Okay, so for number 5, who knows the flavor for number 5? Blueberries. That's right. Yep, those are blueberry infused cranberries. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, a super food. So anyway, so number one is actually produced by Paradise Meadows, which is that's the low sugar one with no additional substitute. So I put some of the nutritional facts up there so you could see. So the regular cranberries, craisins or dried sweets have usually around 27 to 29 grams of sugar. This one's got 13. It also has a lot of fiber, so that may or may not be a good thing. And it has 100 calories. The other ones have like 130, so it's not a huge calorie savings, but it's a lot of sugar savings. So these are called lean crayons. They sell them at Big Y. These are ones that you've probably seen in the store. Okay, so number 2 is the reduced sugar craisin. So that actually has sucralose put in it. Okay, so but it has a different texture to it than the lean crayons. So, but again, very similar in its profile as the lean crayons, but different certainly from the original. So here you're looking at 28 grams of sugar compared to 14, 3 grams of fiber compared to 10, and a few more calories. And then the last ones, this is a different number 4, is made by Mariani, which is produced by one of the independent non-ocean spray handlers. Again, very similar, these last 3 are very similar as far as their calories, but these guys have a lot of fiber and a lot of sugar as compared to these guys. So just to give you a range of the kinds of products that are out there. The first one is called Lean Crayons, which is made by Paradise Meadows, which is also an independent. I don't think it's that they get rid of the fiber. The other ones put in additional. They put in an additional ingredient it's a corn-based fiber that they actually infuse into it. So the original number 3 just doesn't have additional. That's just what the cranberries naturally come with. They're just not a high fiber food. Okay, we ready for the end? Here we go. We're going to jaunt to the end. Our extension activities. We do the whole slew of extension activities from workshops, fact sheets. We put out lengthier publications, maybe things that we revise on a 5-year basis or a 10-year basis. There are some products we put out, like Ann did, Insects in the Northeast. That would probably be once in her career. She will do those kinds of things. We provide diagnostic services for our growers. As I mentioned, they come in with their jars and their bouquets, and they need to know what's out on their bog. We have website. We do IPM phone service where a grower can call in and I talk to them and leave a recorded message and they can hear what's going on in the field. We provide a lot of one-on-one assistance. I spend a lot of my time just talking to growers on the phone or on their bogs about their problems and what they can do to remedy them. And surprisingly enough, we actually deal with a lot of insurance claims. Maybe not a lot, but on occasion we'll have insurance claims that will come in for either crop disaster or something else that's come through, and we have to provide that expert opinion. Like I was just called in where actually a car flipped over off the road into a grower's bog. And there was a certain amount of damage that was done to the bog, and I was called out to try to estimate what the grower would need to do in order to get his bog out and, those sorts of things. So, yes, it's interesting. This is, oh my God, there's a farmer in the dell. But this isn't too far from the truth on what we have to deal with. When I first started, most of our growers did not own a computer. Now we just did a survey just this year, so 23 years later, and we still have 12% of our growers that don't own a computer. We have 5% that don't own a cell phone. That's not so bad. But this is a good learning curve for us still that we're working with, is to try to get our growers to go to our website, go to YouTube, to get different kind of educational stuff. So this is where I see like the next 10, 20 years of our extension efforts are going to be, oriented to some of this electronic media. So here's just a graph of, what they tend to use their computers for. They use it for email. It's the big thing. They do some searching, but, Twitter's not really happening. We don't have enough 20-something growers yet. Oh, then just to mention in our demographics, probably 2/3 of our growers are 55 years or older. Just like most industries. So we really have an aging grower population. But the good news, as Dan had also mentioned, is that we're starting to see an influx of younger growers come in, which is really, really great. So now we're almost kind of getting a little bimodal that will have, maybe, 10 or 50% of under 30s. And then we'll have, the big clump at the end. So that's really encouraging. We put out a management guide every year. It's available in print and as PDF. This is a thing that growers put in their truck that they refer to every day. This lists all the different compounds they can use, all the different cultural practices they can use, and it's up to date every year. So this is a really valuable tool that, like our cranberry sales, remember I mentioned that we, funnel that money back in. This all goes in to support this kind of thing, so we could give this to our growers for free. The BMPs are a nice product that we put out. Again, this is a best management. It's not what you have to do, but we give the grower a goal. If you could be the best, what would you want to do? And that's what these things. And this was a very collaborative research. We had growers, NRCS, us, all at the table trying to figure out what would be, good practices. And then it helped us to identify some areas that we needed to work on to fill in the gaps. Some of our fact sheets. Here's an extension meeting back in the 1950s, and things really haven't changed very much. It's still a good way, just like Dan showed with Ron standing out in the field. That's the good way for us to communicate our information. We always get growers to come to our workshops. Always have good crowds. So as I mentioned, some of our new extension activities, it's going to be web-based activities. We're going to have to drag our growers up the learning curve. Using YouTube, having webinars, that'd be a great way for us to be able to get out information. I could just see some of the new guys, they're going to have their little cell phones and they'll just be sitting on their tractor and doing a half an hour webinar with us or something like that and getting their information and then just keep on doing what they're doing. So just to recapture how we're funded, our activities, we have a wide variety of things from federal, state, campus, industry, in-kind support from our growers, and monetary gifts. Some of the services that we provide, I think what we do a really good job at is that we can really gear our project specifically to what our growers need. We have a multidisciplinary staff right there at the Cranberry Station that are all dedicated to serving the cranberry industry. So we can provide a lot of one-on-one help, and we're all into it. We're all excited about what we do. We all love what we do, and we want to try to move the industry forward. And I think what the growers really appreciate is that they really feel that we do have some integrity with them, that we're shooting straight from the hip with them. We'll tell them this is a good thing, this is a bad thing, and that there's a certain trust there that I think really helps us be able to do our job well. And again, some of our challenges, we're farming in wetlands. We have a lot of neighbor issues. We have a lot of pest problems. We're working in a micro crop. We're working in a perennial crop that takes years to get answers. We have, the numerous pests. We got our learning curve, and we just have, a handful of us that are working on cranberries in the industry. So my challenge to you is come see cranberry harvesting. Come down to southeastern Massachusetts. We're only 2.5 hours away. Columbus Day is a great day to come. That's the peak harvest. There's actually a harvest festival that's at the Makepeace Farms. You can take a helicopter ride. It's really cool. There's great stuff if you have kids. And it's an excellent opportunity. You can see wet harvesting and dry harvesting right there. And it's a really it's a fun day. And so I encourage you to come down to do that. And then I forgot to mention that we have a lot of Finns and Scandinavians that work in cranberries down in southeastern Massachusetts. And on Columbus Day, Chet always revolts against Columbus Day. And he wears his Viking hat when he's out there harvesting. So I'd be happy to take any questions. And thank you for your attention.
Cranberry growers, do you work with the public libraries to build resource libraries for the community?
The question was, in the communities where there's a lot of cranberry growing, do we work with the public libraries to create a resource for...
Have they come to you to build resource collections based on that industry?
Or has the library come to talk to us? I would say probably, not to my knowledge. We actually have a library at the Cranberry Station. And then with UMass Dartmouth, they also have a very substantial cranberry library as well. So as far, I don't know, Elizabeth, do you know of any in the towns around that have, through the town libraries?
I think in Wareham they have, they have like newspapers and local history.
Yeah.
Cranberries is part of the local history.
Yeah. But like whenever anything comes out in the paper or anything, we always save that and we archive all that right at the station. So I think we probably house the largest library for cranberry-related material.
With the bogs in the suburban areas, and I've got one picture that struck me as all these big, these big houses with big lawns, and how do you deal with public and putting pesticides and fertilizers on their lawns?
Yeah, so the question is, how do you try to distinguish between some of the pesticides that are applied by the neighbors versus the pesticides that are going out, from the farm? And this is a big challenge, especially if there's septic systems and stuff like that. And that's where education comes in, and it's really important. And that's some of the work that Casey's going to be doing, because he's going to actually be tracking, because we can track what comes into the bog and what leaves the bog. And so we can actually make a budget, per se, for nitrogen or for phosphorus. So then we can know with normal practices, what would you expect to be emitting from a cranberry bog. And then if you find, so if it's X coming out of cranberry and there's 3X in the pond, then you know the 2X must be coming from another source.
Have you tried to work with the public?
Yes.
Local?
Well, the question was, do we work like with governmental policy in doing that? So we don't really do that ourselves, because we're science and we're very production oriented. But like some of that legislative policy work would go on by the Cranberry Institute. So we would funnel our research data to those types of groups, and they would go down to Washington to try to make, the legislation that might be related to that, or through our Growers Association, they would go up to Beacon Hill to try to work with the policymakers up there to legislate, what sort of water concerns. And like I know Carolyn, who's our water nutrition person, she lives in the town of Wareham. She's gone to many, many town meetings to try to provide, the data that she's worked on for years to try to inform the town officials when they're making policies. So it's very grassroots. So that's how we get involved. But anything that's on a larger scale than that, we really have to rely on our industry groups to carry the ball for us.
You mentioned the cranberry scare.
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh. So everybody still refers to what happened back in 1959. So right around when Thanksgiving was happening, there was an herbicide that was detected in the cranberries that was not registered. Okay, so it was called aminotriazole, and so this was an unregistered compound detected in the fruit that was harvested, and so a lot of the fruit they weren't too sure exactly where it came from, or there was a lot of unknowns, but they ended up trashing a lot of the cranberries, and it was like right before Thanksgiving, so a lot of people lost a lot of money. And so that's why now we have such a strict residue testing program of what comes through, and when we're testing a compound that's not registered in cranberries, we call it, compound O or compound B. When we get money from the growers, we have to sign a piece of paper that says we won't talk about compounds that aren't registered, because it's so critical for the industry to only have what's registered on the fruit and not have, unregistered compounds start showing up. So that was a very brutal lesson. But the old timers still talk about, what happened in 1959. That's where we lost a lot of those bogs on the Cape because they just went out of business. Yep, in the back.
So I know it's very unique, but do you see any sort of cross-education between other micro farming industries, some of those other micro foods that you talked about?
So even though cranberries are unique, is there any opportunities to have cross collaborations with other small groups? And absolutely. There's a small fruit IPM working group that I participate in that has, folks that do strawberries and raspberries and wine grapes, and because we do have common issues. Like one thing that's common to those guys that cranberries happens to not be having an issue with is spotted winged Drosophila. I don't know if any of you have heard about that, but that's a fairly new insect that's hitting blueberries and strawberries and any soft-skinned fruit. Just so happens cranberries have a really tough skin, so the female can't get her ovipositor into the fruit in order to make it go to mush. It's called spotted winged Drosophila. Yeah, it's basically like a fruit fly. And so it's very good at what it does. But that's something that we collaborate on, and we actually try to get grant money to support the New England area for trying to develop techniques because, there is some overlap, between cultural methods, but cranberries is a little bit on the outside. But, I try to participate in those groups just to make sure that, we kind of stay in the loop of what other groups are finding out too. So it's a good question. Yep.
Two kind of different questions. First question, are birds, do they like to eat cranberries or any mammals? Are they
Okay.
any other pests besides insects?
Okay.
Crops?
Okay. Do you want me to answer that one first? Okay, so are there other mammals or birds that like to eat cranberries? Absolutely. We find deer out on the bog. They eat cranberries. Geese are out all the time. And they'll actually dig into the bog, and they like some of the other weed seeds that are out there, like from wild bean has a nutlet, and they'll dig for that. Certainly there's got to be a lot of other small birds out there because we will find, their droppings will definitely be red colored. So they're definitely eating the fruit out there. Yep.
Do farmers cover the bogs at all?
She's wondering if we cover it with a netting, and that's really unrealistic. Yeah, we can't do that like what they would do for blueberries or something like that. And they're actually considering using netting to trap out the spotted winged Drosophila. But yeah, we don't do any kind of netting. They'll try to, have dogs or, little scary, shiny things or something out there to try to keep them away.
I just had,
Uh-huh.
my other question
Oh, yep.
was, would you publish a paper, related to your cranberry research? What sort of journal would you publish it in, or what sort of journals?
Oh.
would you use?
I was wondering that too.
Oh, okay. Well, it really depends on our discipline. We'll go with hort science or hort technology. I tend to publish in weed science and weed technology. Frank would publish in plant disease and phytopath. The societies of agronomy and soil science. That's what Peter tends to go into, or plant physiology. Those tend to be the major ones that we would go. We don't publish like in Science or Nature or any of those because our work's way too applied for that. Yep, we'll take one over here.
So in one of the charts that you showed, it had a precipitous drop in the cost of the price of cranberries
Right.
in the late 90s.
Yep.
It really went.
Yep.
Why was that?
So she was wondering why the price dropped so dramatically in 1999. That was just classic oversupply and no market. So we just had way too many cranberries, and actually Ocean Spray controls about 2/3 of the crop of the market, and they had certain marketing plans that didn't really pan out, and they had anticipated there to be greater need, and that didn't come through. More people were planting, and so we just ended up too much fruit and not enough products going out. So, yep, right behind her.
I'm wondering about the rainfall this month. Is this an extraordinary amount of rainfall? Is this going to impact this year's growth season's
Yeah, so just curious about the copious amounts of rainfall that we've been getting. It could really depend by location. Remember those flumes that I showed you? That's one way that growers can try to either keep water on their bog or release water off of their bog. So as long as if they're higher than their water source, then they're able to allow a lot of that water to go off-site. So they should probably be okay, but if you have a bog that tends to hold water, if it's in a low spot or you have bad drainage, then you're probably going to end up having Phytophthora and fruit rot issues. So I think it's really going to depend on, location, but it's cause for concern.
Is flooding a problem?
Is flooding a problem? Absolutely. I mean, when we get hurricanes, bogs can get flooded for a day or something in August with salt water, because some of them are very close to the estuaries, and that's traumatic. I mean, you can lose your crop. So, does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, right behind her.
You said that you sent all your research findings to the Cranberry Institute. Do you take care of your research data and your raw data? Who takes care of it for you?
Yeah, she was wondering about how we kind of take care of our data. So just to clarify, we don't necessarily send all of our research data to Cranberry Institute, but if they have a particular issue that we can contribute to, then we would provide them with those data. And then we're all responsible for keeping track of our own. We don't really have a data repository or anything like that. We have been engaging with ScholarWorks here, so once we publish something, we were one of the first communities of engagement to come up on the ScholarWorks for UMass, and so we have, a lot of our presentations and our different publications up on ScholarWorks.
Just to clarify that ScholarWorks is our institutional repository.
So that's the institutional repository, a digital repository for UMass, which has been really great for us. It's a really nice resource. Other questions in the back?
Before the rain we had a spring drought. So has the spring drought had any effect on cranberry?
Just wondering about the effect of the spring drought on cranberries. Cranberries are a pretty resilient plant, and we can also provide irrigation, so it's actually easier for us to deal with periods of drought, because, as long as there's water available in the ponds, that we can provide water. I mean, nothing's as good as Mother Nature in a rain because it's uniform and it's, a lot nicer than a sprinkler system. But that's usually a little easier for us to deal with than periods of excessive rain, because then you're always trying to drain, and sometimes you get behind the 8 ball on that. So, but I don't think we'll have any particular problems. Great.
Were there any predictions of impact of climate change on the cranberry industry?
Wondering about predictions of climate change on the cranberry industry. I don't know, Dan, do you have any sense in general? I don't think we have anything particular for the cranberry industry, but.
Well, I mean, in the Northeast, we're going to get wetter and warmer. In fact, the only thing that I've been asked to talk about is, can they grow peaches in Maine?
Yeah, just for the sake of the video, he was just saying that, he's just had questions about trying to grow peaches in Maine. And I've also heard that, the Massachusetts area is going to become, good for grape growing. So I'm sure that, cranberries need that chilling requirement. And if we get to a weather pattern where we don't get our X number of hours at a cool temperature, then that's going to impact their life cycle and their productivity. So it certainly cause for concern.
Is there any reason that we don't find frozen cranberries in grocery stores all year round, like blueberries?
Yeah, Elizabeth's wondering why there's no frozen cranberries all year round, and this is a good point. There should be, but as I mentioned, we only have 5% of our crop that's harvested fresh, and those are the ones that could actually be frozen, to be available, and that's a great marketing question. And I really think it would really be helpful to be able to have that, so that's definitely a business decision. Yep, in the back?
When you draw water from the pond during dry seasons, are you also monitoring the ecosystem of that pond as well? So that the water that's drawn out is harming any of the natural vegetation or the natural flow of the animals that are there?
Right. So the question is, when growers withdraw water from a pond, do we do any monitoring to look at the impact of the drawdown from our activities? And so the short answer is that, we tend to return a lot of that water back to the pond, because a lot of the water use tends to be non-consumptive. So one is that we don't do any specific monitoring of that, but we do end up returning a lot of the water back. So we would anticipate that we would be having really a minimal impact on the aquatic life, surrounding, on the bog surrounding there.
So would there be a higher level of contaminants going back in?
So she's wondering about the higher level of contaminants that might be going back in. So when a pesticide is applied to a cranberry bog, there's a holding time that's based on the chemistry of the pesticide. So growers use that flume to actually hold the water in the bog to allow time for that chemical to break down before the water is released. So there are precautions built in to try to minimize. Is it perfect? No. But it does really help to minimize the release of toxic products back into the water. Yep.
This is just sort of a funny thing, but the cranberry bog that I've been to is the one in Foxborough next to Gillette Stadium.
Okay.
Patriot Place.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just wondering about the cross-promotional possibilities.
You have the Patriots wear little cranberries on their. Yeah.
That Ocean Spray run, I believe it's an Ocean
Yes.
Spray
Yeah.
bog, and it's on a nature trail.
Right.
It's probably the furthest west bog that I know of. I don't know if there are ones further than.
Yeah, she was just mentioning that there is a small commercial bog right next to Gillette Stadium that Ocean Spray uses for publicity, and they have like a 5K run and different things like that. And I think that's mostly what it's for, is for PR, and that's fine. I mean, I think that's great. And they actually had a bog that they had down in Epcot, that they had some of our growers went down and built a bog down in Epcot. To just showcase cranberries. And a couple of our growers are actually went down to Rockefeller Center for multiple years and actually built a bog down at Rockefeller Center, just to, bring cranberries. Around Thanksgiving, of course, just to kind of, bring cranberries up into people's minds so that they understand some of the cultivation aspects. But I can mention that to Ocean Spray. Yep.
Do farmers buy insurance, crop insurance?
Yeah, do farmers buy crop insurance? Yeah, I mean, some do, absolutely.
It's up to them.
Yeah, it's up to them. You can get like catastrophic insurance, or you can buy, there's several different products, which I have to admit I'm not totally familiar with, but it is available. I think a lot of them don't buy it because it's just very expensive, and they'll just take their chances. But I know some do. Naka.
I just wanted to follow up on the ScholarWorks point and say that those chart books are available to the public.
Oh, absolutely.
On all their extension publications are now on ScholarWorks, so people, in fact, some of it's linked on the website.
Yeah, so Naka was just saying that all of our extension publications are available on ScholarWorks. Yeah, so it's all out there for people to see and read and view. Yep.
Are you able to look at any of the raw data from any other regions or any other areas where cranberries are grown, like data about climate or just different kinds of data that you're collecting? Are you able to compare that to other regions?
He's wondering if we're able to compare any of our raw data to Wisconsin or the Pacific Northwest as far as climate, or do you mean like production data or?
Any kind of information?
Yeah, I mean, we actually, since we're such a small group, we do meet we meet every 2 years to talk about stuff, and we all know each other, so I could just call you up and say, hey, can you send me your data set from your experiment from 3 years ago? And usually people are very willing to do those kinds of things, because we're all trying to, move the ship forward. So that's a nice thing. There's not that competition, which can happen in some disciplines. It can be very, very competitive, and we tend to be more congenial, fortunately. Yep.
I really appreciate the insight into the long-term nature of a lot of the cranberry research. And one of your papers I thought was illustrative of this, the time-consuming nature of working with Dodder seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that scarification technique with the handheld rotary? I just couldn't imagine how you would scar a little seed.
Okay.
With a handheld rotary.
This was some work that was done by Katie Gantus, because when Those little Dodder seeds that I showed you, they're like little poppy seeds. They're very, very hard. And what you have to do is you have to break that seed coat somehow. And so you can do that chemically or mechanically. So some people have done things like they've used a mortar and pestle and they've ground them in sand. They've used hydrochloric